So thank you all for coming to our talk, which we hope really is more of a conversation. I'm Lisa Kessler. Hopefully most of you have seen this show already, or you'll come over afterwards. I do want to thank, though, Howard and Renee for putting this all together, the show and the talk. All your support through this whole process, which has been a long time in the making. So I want to just tell you a little bit about why I have my two side gals here, and who they are and what we have to do with each other, and then just give you a little introduction to the talk and the conversation. So Kathy is someone who I met in 2002 outside of the Cathedral of the Holy Cross, which is down the street, actually with John and Lucia, who were there as well. Probably in the early months of when the first revelations about the crimes in the Catholic Church were revealed in the Boston Globe. And it was a pretty intense time, and I can't tell you when I exactly met Kathy, because the whole nature of my work and of documentary work is to just keep showing up. And so I was there over a long period of time, and eventually we got to know each other and form a kind of connection. Mm-hmm. And eventually, by 2003, I really felt that my still photographs weren't telling the whole story and absolutely weren't conveying the complexity of the survivors who I'd met. And so Kathy was one of 3 survivors who agreed to work with me, having long conversations that I recorded, and that became the audio part of Heart in the Womb. Kathy also was involved with a lot of, or I should say is involved with a lot of very collaborative, cooperative projects with other survivors of clergy abuse, starting way back with something called the Call to Reform, which, well, you can talk about it, a Truth and Reconciliation Committee, in an organization, well, SNAP, the Survivors Network of Those Abused by Priests, and STOP, Speak Truth to Power. And I'll let you tell more about yourself when it's your turn,
Okay.
because I have a lot more to say. Billie and I met when I saw her photographs, probably on a blog somewhere, and I immediately recognized that they were also photographs that had aspects of the Catholic Church as a subject, but that they weren't about religion per se. That they were definitely, aside from being beautiful, they were getting at other things than religion or institutions. I didn't know exactly what, but I just sent her an email and said, hey, there's a little connection here between our bodies of work. I'm looking to amplify mine. Would you be willing to talk to me? And now 2.5, 3 years later, here we are. Billie and I have written a proposal together to show our work together. I should tell you that her work is, the work that brought us together is published in this book called Reconciliation, and it's a 10-year study that she made of Catholic confessionals. Mm-hmm. And it's a beautiful book, and it's a beautiful body of work where she's taking a large format camera and looking at the photographs, looking at the spaces very slowly and carefully. And so it's kind of the reflective, she'll talk more about it, but and so we've written a proposal together. We're hoping to put our show on the road. Maybe Kathy will be part of it. We're hoping to find an institution, museum, larger institution, who would understand what we're trying to do with our works together. So that's my very brief introductions of these two wonderful friends who are connected by our work. And I we came up with 3 ideas that we want to talk about. And the first one is that our work, all of us, you know, Kathy is, well, I'm not gonna put a label on you. But all of our work is about much more than the church. And so, we'll each talk about that a little bit, maybe, of what our work, whether it's art or activism or a combination, where do we see that connecting to other parts of society? The second idea is that art is a different language. There's a lot of artists here today, I can see, so a lot of you are familiar with maybe some of the ideas that we'll talk about. But just see the idea that art uses a different language to address whatever the subject is, whatever the topic is. Very different from words. And so often some of us might stumble with the words and hope the pictures tell the story. But and the third idea is just very simply that we all work from a perspective of openness, of trying to stay open to whatever is in front of us. I mean, me personally, when I'm out photographing something, I really try not to have, I don't have an idea what I'm doing. I don't have a preconceived idea of what I'm trying to say with the photographs. And so we'd like to carry that sense of openness into this conversation here. And so if anyone has, what we're going to do is we'll have a little conversation amongst ourselves, and if during that time anyone has a question, you just feel free to jump in and ask it. We're fine with interruptions, and then we will leave time. We'll leave a chunk of time for people to ask direct questions. So where should we start?
One thing we didn't figure out.
Yeah.
You want to go?
Yeah.
You want to go, Billy? Or
No.
you want me to get sandwiched between the two of them? That have images.
Why
Okay.
don't you start, just because you started a little further back in history.
Good. Yes, hi. Again, my name's Kathy, and sometimes words are difficult. Images are much more easier to convey to an audience. Even poetry, even though those are words, when you do poetry, sometimes you can sort of convey it in a more prepared way than the spontaneous words. That actually is a picture of me, and it's an image that all of us survivors used back in 2002. We brought pictures. It was a way to get people who were going into the church and people in general who were reading about this and were having the most hardest time not just accepting what had been revealed, but understanding the dynamic, because there was a bunch of adults talking about what happened to them as kids. And I think this is really a good example of how images is a different language. You can do, I think of it as American Sign Language as a different language, and also using images. And so when they would see all these pictures of little kids, young kids, this was me when I was making my first communion, it would sort of help orient them to the time we're talking about. And there, while we were there protesting and doing what we were doing, and people were coming and trying to understand, I met this woman with a camera. And I just felt very, very good about Lisa. She was held in with great suspicion, though, because she worked for the Archdiocese of Boston, and not too many people trusted her at all. They thought her work was for the church. And I put church in quotes, because it's like in this state, we don't even have to say Catholic Church. All we have to do is say church, and everybody knows what we're talking about. Which again is like language. Language is so limited in what it can convey to people. It can exclude people all the time, language, or it can include people. It really depends on the consciousness of the person who's using the language, So anyhow, I didn't sense, I sensed her energy, which is probably as a survivor, something I learned to do. You know, who has good energy, you know, my God, I've been in therapy like for years, you know, so I've done a lot of work on myself and on healing. And so, and we just gradually got friendlier and friendlier, and it really didn't, I understood what she was saying. She had no goal. She didn't have the outcome in mind. But she did share later that she did think the church was going to make it all better in the beginning, which I think most people did think that, like, to hear what had happened. The other thing that really, for me, was because I'm also a survivor of incest. This was so much more to me. The protest, and it wasn't just about the church. How, you know, to be heard, believed, and accepted is what people who have been sexually abused need to have. And what even today is still so hard to find. I mean, there was an article in about this, and somebody wrote a comment, and she said, Kathy Dwyer claims to be a survivor. And so it was,
in the Globe article?
yeah, in the Globe article, something to that effect. So there's always that, oh, they're out there for the money, they're out there, you know. I don't know too many people who made it up. You know, it's not something you want to make up, number one. Number two, well, just stay with number one. But anyhow, so.
Yeah, and that was going to be my question for you, was like the things that you were doing. You were different than a lot of the other survivors who were out there, who were kind of just coming to grips with it, and different from some of the activists, the protesters, who were shocked that this had happened.
Mm-hmm.
And it's because of your previous experience with some of these issues.
Yeah, I had started my healing journey from my childhood trauma in the early 80s. I had been in protests about sexual abuse. I remember one protest we walked through Chinatown, and the cops came, and we ran and scattered. And I remember I was with I was dating at the time a professor, and she was a professor at Harvard Divinity School, and she sure didn't want to get caught. And so we just like scattered everywhere. So we've been, you know, everything that was done at the church, it was on the shoulders of those who came before. The difference, but I think that's true for everything. You know, we're all just moving forward on those who went before us, and hopefully we're going to be a little bit further on and leave the place so that the people who stand on our shoulders are a little bit further along than we are. But so to me, it was just about so much more, and it wasn't just about church, it was about institutions. But the fact, I think it was Judy Herman that said, the least safest place for a child to grow up is in their own home. And people can't take that in at all. You know, that is so difficult for people to hear. But statistically, that's true. And I can, you know, get you the details of the statistics. I don't have them right there in my brain, but I do have them written down somewhere where that quote's from. So it was like, how do we get this movement to really bring everybody into it and start challenging the institutions, the abuses of power? And then it goes into abuse of power, because that's actually what sexual abuse is. So, anything to, I think that's enough for right now, my introduction. Anybody? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and then, I don't know if you want to just jump in, or you want me to throw you a question?
Sure.
So when I first saw your photographs, I just thought this is someone who understands the church in an intimate kind of way, yet there's a little bit of distance from it. And do you want to talk about that at all, and just like how you approach this whole project?
Yeah, so I guess I began this project about a little over 10 years ago. I was raised Catholic. I grew up teaching catechism and things like that. Shortly after, so here's a little bit my personal background. So shortly after I came out to my parents, they stopped talking to me. So there was this rift in my family. And I would say a lot of the anger that I felt towards my parents, I also felt towards the church. And I began this project for many reasons, but one of them was, I guess, a way to sort of think about, is to sort of grapple with what had happened to my family and what Catholicism meant towards my coming out and the sort of rift that had occurred with my parents. And I began photographing the confessionals in part because I thought they were an interesting sort of conceptual link in the church. I've been thinking about, hold on, so going back to the background with Catholicism, so that's how I got access to a lot of churches, just because that's an interesting tidbit that I was able to sort of speak the language of confession. I could talk about the sacrament of reconciliation when I met with priests and so forth. But I think so much of my project is about reckoning or grappling, which is why I think it's such an interesting word to have started out with. And as I've been preparing to come here, I've been thinking about how those three words that you threw out for us, Lisa, the idea of reckoning, art, and openness are so interconnected. I think one of the things that drew me to the confessionals is that they're, in some ways, I think of them as almost like the humblest part of the church, right? They're not the part of the church that is forward-facing at all. The church itself can be grand and beautiful and elegant, and the landscaping can be perfect. Nobody sees the confessional. And that's an interesting metaphor for the lack of reckoning within the institution and the sort of necessary reckoning that needs to happen at an individual level, that one reckons with things by looking at these like small spaces inside oneself. I'm interested in this idea of the interior, of looking inside as a way to move forward, as a way of grappling. As a way of being able to hold complexity and paradox. I think you can't have complexity if you aren't able to see those like small dirty spaces that are hidden away. And one of the things I like about photography is that it allows you to see multiple things at one time, that you sort of see what's there, but then you also see the layers that are behind the existence of the subject there. And so I think that goes back to the idea of reckoning, and then I keep thinking that openness isn't really possible if you don't, openness is the necessity of what comes after reckoning. That sort of if you are able to do the work of reckoning, then that allows for a kind of openness. And I would say that in the process of working on these pictures, I became less angry at the church and more open in a way. And this isn't like, I'm not doing this as like an apology for the church or anything like that, but simply that making angry pictures didn't work. Like I began making these like very kind of angry, aggressive pictures, very German pictures, and they just were very bad and they weren't interesting. And I realized that if I was able to make pictures that sort of took into account the individual experiences of people that I know who went to church, or I would meet people when I was at the churches who had these very personal experiences, that the images took on a lot more depth and complexity, and that was a lot more. That was what I wanted to communicate, rather than the sort of singular kind of anger.
Wow.
Yeah. No, go ahead.
No, no.
I was going to ask you a question.
Yes.
Yeah. I've asked you this a little bit before, but I can ask it again. Now that you're at this point in the journey of this work, how does it feel to have the photographs up, and the conversation around the work, I guess, so close to where so much of the protests began, right, at the Holy Cross?
Well, the physical distance doesn't mean anything to me,
Oh, doesn't?
to the
Okay.
church. But the time means a lot, and having the work up on the walls has really changed things for me. When Renee and Howard and I were doing the installation and the layout, and it was actually quite fast. Very skilled. They know the space. They knew the work. And then I remember Howard turned to me and said, "What do you think? How do you like it?" And I just said, "I don't know. I can't see it. Like I can't absorb it." But over the course of these 6 weeks of the show being up, it's really changed things in me. It's made everything very public, and it's given me the opportunity to have a lot of conversations, both in the media and with friends and colleagues. And I really feel like, how do I say it? The work has stood the test of time, and the instincts that I had at the time that this was about something much bigger than the church. And my own idea was the connection between the clergy abuse and sexual abuse that goes on all day long in homes and all kinds of places. And it's, I've been able to get to where I really understand that what the survivors did by coming forward and speaking up about the most blasphemous thing, that a priest could harm a child, could rape a child, could assault a child, molest a child, that people now can talk about the bigger ideas of how it's connected to other forms of abuse in society, and that the Me Too movement, which was not anywhere on the radar. I mean, back in 2002, we were still kind of clinging to the work of the women's movement to address sexual assault. And now, the other day in a class, I asked students, they weren't my students, I asked them how many of them felt that if they spoke up today, if someone was hurting them and they spoke up, do they think they would be believed? And every single one of them raised their hand. And I just thought,
That's encouraging.
it's really encouraging, because it was not true for any one of our generations. And, even that story that came out the other day related to Ketanji Brown Jackson's hearing, and that they were trying to harass her and talk about, that her decision was supporting pornography, and that this young man who she gave too lenient a sentence to, and he was interviewed in the Washington Post, and he said, I couldn't talk about this, and so I looked at some pictures, and she understood that there was, he needed a chance there. Anyway, I don't know if that answered the question at all.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
What do you think? Bring it to us. Yeah, jump in.
I have a question, Lisa. When you started this, you were shooting for
With the Archdiocese. So I spent the 90s as a freelance photographer for the pilot for the Archdiocesan newspaper.
right, and
And-
as it became more, as the story started to come out.
But at the time the story came out, I wasn't working for the
Okay.
Archdiocese anymore. I'd moved on. But as is my habit, I didn't burn any bridges. And so I was able to go to the Archdiocese and request permission to have access to to document what was happening on my own, not as a job. And I was granted the permission with the one caveat that I not release the pictures into the news cycle, which I had absolutely no interest in the news cycle, because the news cycle was this steamroller, and I'm, in some ways slow in that. I had no interest in that. I wanted to understand what was happening, and I knew it would take time. It's taken me a long time, and I feel like the culture is kind of caught up.
So you didn't feel like you were censored in any way, that you could shoot it the way you wanted?
I had access. I was given access because I used it very delicately.
Yeah.
I never. I just kind of would read a situation and know when to push and when to pull back, and it was only after Cardinal Law resigned and left that I was no longer allowed in. When Bishop Lennon took over, the doors were closed to me.
Really?
Yeah, jump in, Jim.
I was going to ask a related question, Lisa. What's always fascinated me about you and your relation with the survivors is how you establish credibility with the survivors, coming in. And maybe you don't want to pursue that more, but maybe it's between you and Kathy to understand how you as a documentary artist, somehow established that relationship, which is so close, but very fraught in the beginning. I mean, having heard the whispers, who is that? Oh, she's a photographer for the pilot.
I just tried to tell the truth.
Yeah.
Just tried, and I didn't rush anything. I understood why people mistrusted me. I didn't blame them at all.
Yeah. Do you have a strategy in that, or does it just come naturally to you? No,
I mean, I
Well, it's just, yeah. I
is
don't
that
know.
that's you? Do you think
it's
about
partly
it?
her, but there was also, for me at least, there was this consistency.
Yeah.
You were there.
I was just,
She was there as much as everyone else was there. And just that consistency alone, and the consistency of how she was there, that didn't waver either. It wasn't like one week she was there and saying, oh, those stupid people, or, you know, there was no judgment. It was just her presence was there, consistent, taking photos of whatever her photo eye, you know, whatever the artistic part of her wanted to capture. And that's, I think, one of the things that made it very easy for me to become very comfortable with Lisa, was consistency.
I was really uncomfortable. I mean, let's
Maybe I
not.
picked up on that too.
I was really uncomfortable. I mean, I was scared.
Yeah.
I didn't understand all the yelling and screaming. I just, you know, I'm not a yeller and screamer, and I was scared. I knew people didn't like me. I couldn't really wrap my mind around what they were saying.
Well, you didn't grow up in the church.
I didn't grow up in the church, so I didn't have the deference, and I didn't have the rage.
Sense of betrayal.
I didn't have the sense of, well, eventually I did, because, you know, I mean, I had spent 10 years working for an institution that was, you know, covering up the most heinous of crimes, and I'm sorry, but the excuse that we didn't know is just such bullshit. It's just not okay. I mean, even if you didn't know, you should have known that an adult raping a child is a problem. And even if you are so closed in your world that you are not going to go to the police with it, well, take the damn rapist away from the children. Like, it's not that complicated.
Right. And also, I just want to add one other thing, her honesty. That was, she always was honest about her past involvement with the church, that she had worked for the church, that she know, you know. So I would say honesty and consistency, and gradually conversations.
Yeah.
We began talking.
Yeah. But Jenny was up first.
Yes, it's so great to hear this conversation. So one thing I just wanted to ask you, I've heard you tell the story of how you grew this project over the years. And one thing that you would say connected to how uncomfortable it was to be in the middle of all this. But at the same time, your empathy and your connection was always super clear hearing your story. But one question when you told your story before was, someone once asked you, whose side are you on, Lisa? And hearing that question now in this room, I wondered if you wanted to I wanted to tease out that piece of the way you were five back then.
You know, that was Rick Webb, whose wife was a victim of clergy abuse as a child, and you know, she's a therapist and involved with SNAP. And Rick was he was one of the angriest protesters. He's the one who carried around a sign that said House of Rape.
Yeah.
And he had a bullhorn. He was really aggressive, and he would confront people as they would come into the cathedral. And one day he turned to me without the bullhorn. We were on the side of the church. I remember he turned to me, because I just was there all the time, and he said, Lisa, whose side are you on? And I just looked at him, because I don't like to talk a lot when I'm photographed, actually, kind of recede. And he said, are you going to help us get rid of cardinal law or what? And I just said, Rick, I'm just photographing. I'm just trying to understand what's happening. Like, I can't do that. You know, that's not for me to do. And so I think that was the thing that kept me sane through it. It was just the commitment to the photography and knowing, you know, just having this belief that, you know, we make things that last, and, you know, hopefully you make a book or a recording or something that other people can see over the long, you know, length of history, and they can never say it didn't happen.
And I have a new mantra now too. It's like, even if it never gets read or never gets seen or never gets heard, it doesn't mean it's not worth doing. And you don't know that long after you cross over, it may get read and be just the thing someone needed to see.
I have a question about the intersection of activism and art. Several of you have mentioned openness, and I know, Lisa, you talked about not having a goal when you go into a project, and I'm just curious for each of you, is that openness something that you start with, that's there throughout the whole process? Does it evolve as a way to approach all of this? How does that change over time?
For me, it changes over time. I don't know, Lisa might be different, but I'm not sure if I think I'll often go into a project thinking I'm doing one thing. Like for this project, for example, I thought I was making one kind of image, and then the more that you look and you think about the work that you're making, and the more that you read or you talk to people, then maybe the direction of the work changes. And I guess I would just say that because I think photography is such a literal medium that it's hard to be too narrow with it, or the work becomes overly didactic. And so I think the work has to be a little bit open to make room for the audience, to make room for communicating something, so that people looking at the image can bring something of themselves to the work.
For me, I agree with Billie. It changes from time. And one of the proudest things I think I am of what we did, there were 20 survivors that came. 22 survivors came together, and by consensus. And that's not easy. Consensus, in this case, I created a new definition, means I may not like it, but I can live with it, okay? And because we were responding to what people kept asking us, what do you want? What do you want? What do survivors want? So we sat down and we wrote this document, and we called it the Call to Reform. And, you know, tried to present it to O'Malley, and it had a lot of compassion in it. You know, it was like, I think one of the best places of the compassion, it required a lot of openness. And the compassion was, for those priests who were abusing children or vulnerable adults, you need to not let them around them, and take them to, create a place. Okay, don't send them to prison, but create a place. Let them say their mass, but never let them off this site. And I'm simplifying now, but never let them off this site without someone accompanying them that knows and understands the dynamics of sexual abuse and predators. Okay, you know, so we worked really hard on this, and I wrote a paper on it because we tried to present it. O'Malley on the papers, in the newspapers, always said, no, we'll meet with survivors anytime, any place. They just said, 3 times we were denied. And we called a press conference and said 3 times we were denied. And to this day, we sent it to them, but never a response to it. You know, so, and just recently, we were able to pass it on to somebody that really understands sexual, wrote books herself, Judy Herman, and we'll see what maybe it'll see the light of day through her. And I was just so excited that she wanted it. She's a great therapist, psychotherapist, and book writer. So.
Well, and a total leader in the movement against sexual assault and rape, and education about it, and supporting survivors and helping them understand how to move forward. So.
Even her first book, Father-Daughter Incest, I remember somebody had given me a stuffed animal early on, and it was a polar bear. And in her book, she had talked about Saint Dymphna, who was the patron saint of the mentally afflicted. And to this day, my kids know the name of my stuffed animal, which is Dimphna.
I mean, I'll answer that just by saying that I wanted to be an activist as a younger person. I had very strong opinions about everything. And when I finally, settled on photography, every time I would try to take photographs that were activism, that had an agenda, I just felt they didn't work as well. And I was trained as a photojournalist, and when I worked as a photojournalist, I hated the fact that all the work I did as a independent, as a photographer, editorial work, commercial work, whatever, there was always, you were just there to illustrate the preconceived idea, and I just couldn't handle it. And so that's, my own work has always been much more open without an agenda, because I think then more of yourself can come through the work if you don't start with the answer. That's what I had rejected in my paid work, and it's what I rejected in my personal work.
Really important, Lisa. That's enormous.
Your collection is the only collection. What did you say the other night? I mean,
Oh,
this is really significant,
Yeah.
I think.
When Billie asked me the other day, and she said, how are things different for you? I said, I just finally have realized that my work is the only collection of still photographs that looks deeply at the church, at the survivors, and at the protesters. And that, by having all of the elements in there, it makes the work stronger and helps explain the work of the survivors as this kind of stepping stone towards the Me Too movement, and towards, from this culture of denial and silence to a culture of transparency and accountability that we're trying to move towards in a lot of parts of society. And it just has been, this is kind of what I was saying about the show, that it has helped me realize that the thing that I thought was a limitation for many years, that my work with the church I had felt was a limitation, now I understand that it actually deepens the work for change. I may have said that the other day, sorry. Yes.
Well, even at that, I'm filling up with kids because it's just so powerful to me as a survivor. Number one, to be part of that, but what she's captured, and it's there, and it's not going anywhere.
Yeah.
It's there.
Yeah, there's this author named Kevin Quashing who writes about quiet activism, and I would say that your images are a quiet activism.
Yeah.
There's a power to that sort of quiet activism.
Yeah, someone said that about the layout of the show, that the decisions that you made about the pictures and how to lay them out doesn't hit people over the head with an agenda, but it creates a space where you can slowly absorb what's happening. And that's all to your credit, because I couldn't do that with my own work. I can see that.
I think somebody had a hand up at the back.
Yeah.
I was thinking about two of the photographs in particular. I mean, they all struck me, but I was thinking about the photograph of Cardinal Law sort of surrounded by a couple of advisors, and then the photo of the lawyers with this sort of like smug kind of look on their faces. And I was thinking about one idea I was thinking about was historical narratives, which we think about a lot today. How are people constructing things, deep into the future? But then also and so like looking at it today, you kind of look at those people, and it's easy to be like, oh, that guy's bad, and those guys are bad, and then walk away from it. And I'm wondering about whether, as a sort of, I don't want to call you a neutral observer, but as a, in the position that you were observing from, did you see people coming to understand what they had done or not done, or did you?
I heard Cardinal Law say a few things in public, because I didn't have a private relationship with him or I was talking privately. I witnessed him in public and listened to what he said. And at certain points I heard things. I remember once at at Mission Church, there was an angry protest outside. I forget which documents had been revealed that day, but people were really angry. And he was angry because he was dealing with the depositions and the lawyers and all that. But when he stood up in front of the church, he said to the parishioners, he said, "Don't be angry about the people outside. They have a right to be angry at us, at me. And he took, that teeny little bit of responsibility, but I never felt that he understood things. He certainly didn't understand things the way I did, or the way Kathy did, or the other survivors who I work with, because he had his religion, and so the answer was always, some religious thing that. But the other thing I'll say to that is that I actually find power very interesting. I mean, I think the reason that I stayed working for the pilot for many years was I felt like I was like just being welcomed into the separate city-state in Boston that my peers didn't know anything about.
Yeah.
And part of it felt very much like an authentic Boston, that, those of us who are transplants here, and especially if you're not Catholic, you just have no access to. But also I found, the opportunity to witness power in action fascinating.
Wow. That's interesting.
I mean, I saw him interact with all kinds of people who just worshipped him, and watching how he managed that, and other bishops as well. And I worked for the Anti-Defamation League for a long time through there as well, and people in the Anti-Defamation League were close with Cardinal Law and Bishop Murphy and other leaders in the church, because one of Cardinal Law's things was interdenominational relations. And there were very strong relationships there between Jewish institutions and Law's cabinet. So I don't know if that answers your question at all. Not so much.
You don't have to answer my question.
No, I want to
I'm
answer.
just curious about, I think I'm glad that you mentioned power, because I often think about like institutional power, and like people, right, can sort of justify things they do by saying, well, it's my job, or like it's my position, I have to do that kind of thing, or I have to make that kind of thing. And so, I guess maybe flipping it, instead of like what you saw in them, did your stance as an artist, observing people going through this process, did it affect the way you would photograph them, sort of levels of sympathy or not sympathy, or witnessing humanity being exerted, or power being exerted, or the intersections of those things?
Photography, my kind of photography where you really can't control anything, I'm not intervening, it's all candid, so really my only impact is choosing where to go on a given day, and then where to stand in the room, in the space, and all that kind of stuff. There were the people who were closest to dealing with the facts of the abuse, the people I knew in the church who were responsible for going through all the files and finding the information, dealing with it, they were human beings. I mean, there was no defensiveness with them. They were not protecting the church anymore. They were mortified, and I didn't feel any, I mean, they're priests, so they're different from me, you know, I'm never gonna be able to, you know, I can't bridge that gap. But then there was Barbara Thorpe, who was the liaison to, you know, from the Archdiocese to victims and survivors, and she was always the most supportive person of me. You know, whereas I felt like when I was outside the church, the activists were angry at me for going inside the church, and when I was inside the church, I felt people were angry at me for talking to the protesters outside. And Barbara Thorpe was the one person who just constantly said, "Thank you for what you're doing, Lisa. Thank you for what you're doing. This is important. This is important." And
She didn't come till later though.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
just, you went through a lot of months without anybody like that.
that's right.
And so did survivors go through a lot of months with absolute horror shows with the church, trying to tell the story, trying to, you know, so it was those initial 6 months, I don't know when Barbara started, maybe in August, I think, of that year, sounds about right.
And yeah, I was just going to say that Barbara recently published an article that I thought was kind of interesting.
Yeah.
Very, you know, she said things that Kathy was saying 20 years ago. You know, it's a crime. Let's stop calling it a crisis or a scandal. Let's stop using these fluffy terms. It's been 35 years since we've known. You know, the information has been there, and it's an insidious problem, not a crime. It's not a crisis. Yes.
I'd be really interested in hearing you speak a little bit about more about the work you did interviewing the survivors. You, at the exhibition, had audio, and previously one of the amazing incarnations of this work was the film. And now you have, you know, this exhibition where you see the work differently. And I'd just like to hear a little about the process, like how working in one medium has informed the other.
Well,
and about relationships with
yeah, I mean,
individuals.
the three people I worked with were Kathy, Olin Horn, who had a very different approach to his activism than Kathy does, and Phil Cogswell, who was, you know, really struggling through those years. And I remember one day he came to a protest. He wasn't there all the time. It was taxing for him, and a radio reporter came up to him and asked him a really, you know, one of those questions that they ask, like looking for a soundbite. And he just started talking like Phil. And he went into this long thing about his spirit and truth, and, you know, just like beautiful. It was beautiful. And it took about 8 seconds for her to realize, you know, she wasn't going to get a soundbite, and she just walked away. And I just laughed, and Phil just laughed. And like, I think that was one of the things that made me realize, oh, you know, we got to do something here. I mean, the pictures weren't expressing the complexity, but, you know, these three people were just so interesting. Yeah. And the way it worked is I let them each decide how they wanted to be recorded. And so Kathy would take me places where she grew up in Braintree. She tried to show me where the church was and all that stuff. So we were in and out of the car. And, Phil would only speak, you know, would only be recorded while he drove and took me around the tour of Concord, where, you know, telling me his stories. But that was it. He didn't want to be recorded in any other situations. And Olin only wanted to be recorded on the phone. So I don't know, I came up with some device that plugged into my phone that connected to some recording machine, and we would talk for hours. And I recently, this was all shot on film, and all the recordings were done on an analog system. And a couple years ago, I had the audio engineer from Boston College, thank you, John, digitize everything. And so I went back and was listening, because I don't know how many hours, there's probably hundreds of hours of recording. And I just started laughing, because Kathy and I were talking the same way we talk now. It's like, we didn't start recording until we were already bonded. And then it's all stayed the same, and Phil and Olin as well, I'm still close with. And so, there just was never anything to, the other thing I would say is that some of what they told me was very difficult to hear. And some of what Kathy told me was very difficult to hear, and I didn't understand it, and I either just listened or I asked her to explain it, and it took me a long time, to really get it all. So, yeah.
Lisa, your work is documentary, black and white. Billie, yours is in color, beautiful, quiet interiors, light, quality of light. I wondered if you could talk about the nuances and subtleties of how you see your work connecting in terms of the proposal of the exhibition that you're working on together.
Also, it is somehow 2:01. But
Okay.
So we have bumper time though, so I just want to let you know.
Thank you. I guess think of Lisa's work as the outside work and mine as the inside work, and maybe Lisa's work is showing what you can see and sort of what was happening in the moment, and then maybe my work, maybe you could think about as what the experience and what perhaps it felt like at the end after the protests went home. That might be I'm overstepping the line a little bit, but I think one is sort of the interior work and one is the exterior work.
Yeah. Yeah, and I was always so frustrated with still photography that the pictures are just so concrete, and when people look at them and, if people look at my work and think, oh, this is about something that happened and it's over and it's fixed, I can't handle that. And so both the audio makes it more real, and then the connection with Billie's work opens it up to whatever it is that you're grappling with, and whatever it is that you need to make a change on the inside. Because I think we all share this idea that we can't really change the outside unless we also look at the inside, whether you call it the shadow or the dark side or the hidden stuff and the whatever it is. Yeah. Oh, we have all kinds of people just jump in. Howard.
I guess this is a question for Kathy. The photograph that this gentleman mentioned of the attorneys standing, on to the left you have the attorneys for the Archdiocese, and then further down you have Attorney Garabedian. And there's a real physical contrast between those people in terms of, and I'm just wondering what it was like, how important was Garabedian to this whole process?
Very important, and to this day, he's even more important than ever. He's continued to just be out there doing this work for survivors. So he was amazing, but that photo was amazing because it sort of really, for me, what it showed was the power of the church.
Right.
And poor Mitch, was just like almost a little guy trying to go around. I mean, one of the things that I wanted to say about the lawyers was when all that stuff started, when the Constance Sweeney made them reveal the documents, one of the lawyers revealed, and this speaks to the gentleman who was asking about did we see change in behavior at all or any accountability. The church had held on to a letter from a priest who had sexually abused a survivor, a victim that they knew, that had come and told them he had been abused, and they told him he was making it up. And the church held on to the letter with the priest apologizing for abusing the victim. And never revealed that to that victim until Constance Sweeney ordered those records to be revealed. So even though Mitch looked little, the consistency and the determination of the voices of survivors and their supporters and the lawyers who were backing them. I mean, there was Carmen, there was Rick McLeish was the lawyer who actually came up with that, and Mitch to this day. I mean, we're having a conference in June, and Mitch has really made the donation to provide for most of the expenses of the conference. So he's just a wonderful lawyer. But it's been like David and Goliath, to use a biblical term.
Yeah.
Does that answer it, Howard?
Yeah, no, that's great, thank you.
Okay.
Yes.
Yes, hello. Thank you very much. I took a personal interest in something in the world, I don't know, 6 months ago, and I've just been going into a crisis over stuff, and it's maybe the lineup of maybe Catholicism in our country, with Ukraine, with the French storyline that's been out there. It vacillated for me comfortably from 330,000 down to what you were putting in the globe as 216,000. Because I hate the numbers. Actually, I just don't like them. But when they get up to that serious threshold, it was it's what happened all of a sudden, and I understand it. I mean, down in New Bedford, we've had the Portuguese church, the oldest one in the country, closed. And why? And so you understand in general. You feel this stuff. But I felt like I was fighting bees in my just general vicinity. I didn't know what it was exactly, because we are dealing with a lot of superficial constructs. So as it stands, I'm feeling that we could use this general feeling as a position in what's going on, and there it is. You've done it. I just want to congratulate you. It's just a beautiful. It's a beautiful message that you've offered everyone, and I mean, to the moon. Really,
Thank
I'm very happy. The question is, what do I do with friends that I've alienated? I've put people in terrible positions since I started saying, well, I can't deal with what you're bringing to me right now. But did you know there were 330,000? Sort of like that was it, and I kind of walked away from 3 different conversations saying that to people quietly. I disrupted everything. I wrecked everything.
Kathy was talking about this a little bit this morning, about the idea of learning to speak up and when to speak up. I would just say personally that I'm an optimist, but I'm also a realist, and that means that I know people are going to hurt other people, right? I mean, here we are, right, with the world the way it is. And for me, what matters is how we respond. as individuals and as a society to bad things that happen. And so being someone who a person who's being hurt would come to is, you know, a great thing for all of us to, you know, have as a goal. Like, am I someone a person would come to and talk? You know, how we respond to people who are being hurt is what matters. We can't we can't change people's ideas about the past. All we can do is, I mean, I think for survivors, the hardest thing was not being able to speak, not being listened, not being believed. And then the horror of not knowing that what happened to you happened to someone else by the same perpetrator. I mean, the cruelty of that, keeping that from someone who was just left alone to suffer, is, you know, it's kind of unbearable to me. So I think that's what we all try to do in our lives, right, is to listen to people and like make space for other people to share their truth. And you know, it's too difficult to do about the past. It just becomes an argument. So we just have to be together in the present. And you know, we are making it better. I mean, you know, things are better now than they were 20 years ago. So.
As I heard on the radio this morning, risk being the person that makes others feel awkward. Takes a lot of courage, and shaky feelings afterwards, and the need, for me at least, to have somebody to support, to go to for support and say, it's okay, you needed to say that.
Yeah. Do you have any last thoughts for us, Billie?
Just that it's been an honor to work with you, Lisa, and to Mary and Kathy. Yes.
Thank you all for coming.
This has been amazing, and somehow today, for the first time, I heard the connection between the idea of reckoning and reconciliation, which I've never heard before. I don't even know exactly what it is, but think about what.
Yes. And I'm just going to make a quick pitch for Billie's book, which is on sale here. And you just come take a look at one, you know, be welcome to. Also in the back I have some postcards for you to take home, and if you want to sign up with your email, we'll keep you in touch with, you know, whatever we're doing.